Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Free Thought Prophet Podcast. I am Seamus. He's carved his initials on the dark side of the moon. Bono has a tattoo of him on his back. He started the fire. Billy Joel felt obliged to lie for him. He is, of course, John Hamill.
How's it going, Seamus? Another masterful introduction there, but I have to say I'm concerned about your voice. Are you going to make it through to the end of this one?
I'm starting to wonder, too. We'll see. Maybe I should switch from coffee to whiskey. I don't know.
Well,
Uh,
like I've told you before, it strikes me that when doctors and surgeons want to sterilize their equipment and get rid of germs and bugs, they soak them in alcohol, don't they?
yep.
So I think there's a lesson there for us all.
So,
Soaking in alcohol is a good thing, say doctors. That's the lesson I'm taking. Busy news day. Your side of the pond. Like I keep telling you, I used to keep wanting to get my fix of House of Cards. Now I just get my fix of CNN. See what's going on. But all my predictions have
just,
been wrong. So
I think
let's see.
the dominoes haven't fallen yet, so it'll be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, given all my previous, I can't remember which previous predictions I made, but I can remember them all being wrong. So I'll give you another one. My next prediction in the soap opera that is Trump Russia is that I think Steve Bannon has been cooperating all along, and Steve Bannon is the guy. Giving the prosecutors all the information behind the scenes. There's my best guess. I'll tell you what that's based on. I don't know if it's been in the news in your side of the pond, but Steve Bannon kind of did a tour of all lots of European countries and speaking at lots of events and supporting all of the right of centre populist parties in Europe. But if you look at the guy's demeanour when he was doing that, and also in that debate with David Frum that he did, if you look at his demeanour, I don't want to say smug, but he's certainly very comfortable in his skin and very
Oh, yeah.
happy with himself. And if you compare that with Roger Stone and Sam Nunberg and Carter Page, when they've been on the media, they're very cagey and they are all very careful about their words. And Steve Bannon just seems entirely relaxed, and he strikes me as yeah. If anyone has some kind of immunity deal behind the scenes, his demeanor strikes me as someone I mean, he's been at the center of everything, so you imagine he
Oh,
should
yeah.
be just as concerned as everyone else, but he seems to me not at all concerned. So, if there's someone behind the scenes who's already been given immunity by the prosecutors in return for a bunch of evidence, my money's on Steve Bannon, looking at the demeanor of the guy.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you there.
Mm. But I think we disagree on some other stuff. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I understand your view to be, yeah, a bunch of people might have done a bunch of bad things, but even when it all comes out, they'll stick with Trump anyway. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, I just unless the donors or the Republicans come to the point where they find out that he's not useful anymore, that
Mm,
they can't, hide him or whatever. I
aye.
don't see.
Mm-hmm.
He might get, may not get reelected. And although if the Democrats roll out people like Kamala Harris,
Yeah.
which is Clinton light,
Mm,
you're gonna get another 4 years of Trump anyway. So,
mm-hmm.
but that's where I'm at with it. So
Okay. Um, so where I have a slightly different view there is I suspect if what comes out is so bad, like if what he's been up to is bad enough, um, for sure, there's the true believers who'll still vote for Trump if he shoots someone in the face on Fifth Avenue. But if I think if it's bad enough, there'll be enough Republicans who will look for their what I'm thinking of is people like William Barr, who was obviously on board with the Trump agenda and auditioning for a role in the Trump administration, and it looks like he'll be the new AG. But I think people like that, if it's bad enough, they'll be thinking of, my place in history and all of this, and they'll want to be the John Deans of the world and not the people who went down on the Nixon ship. Bill Maher still calls him Fat Nixon. So I think there'll be enough Republicans that will think, well, maybe I don't want to be the last man standing on ship Trump. But anyway, let's see. Depends how bad it is, I suppose.
Yeah, and the other thing is you can't count out Fox News and what they'll be able to do for him. So, what are you drinking there, John?
So it's early in the morning. So I have something, some little red juice here I'm drinking to give me it's cranberries. But after that, I'm going to move on to something better when I change glasses.
There you
go. So it's reasonably early for us today, but it's not that early.
It's 9 o'clock here, so.
Okay, so it's 2 p.m. here, so not that early. But anyway, getting on to our guest, today we're going to speak with Diego Fontanive, who was born in Italy in 1973. He is a tutor, a writer, a speaker, focusing on various fields, including metacognition, critical thinking, theory of mind, logic, and cognitive approaches to AI development. He has a background in political science, sociology, modern history, and philosophy. Diego is the creator and tutor of the All in the Mind course for Cambridge e-Learning Institute in the UK, and he was a member of the board of directors at Atheist Alliance International. There's lots to talk about there, and lots of words with too many syllables, Seamus, so maybe Diego can educate us a bit about what all of this means.
Sounds like a plan.
Pretty good. So let's get Diego.
Welcome to the Free Thought Prophet, Diego Fontanive.
Great. It's great to get the chance to talk with you, Diego, and we have a bunch of questions to ask you about the EOF project and several other things. Just before we get into that, though, do you mind if I ask you a bit of a cliche question that we tend to ask all of our guests? Is it okay if I ask Diego, did you have a religious background that you managed to find your way out of, or did you have a secular upbringing?
Well, I grew up in Italy, which is very Catholic.
Sure.
My parents were not religious, but nevertheless they were somehow ingrained in their religious values, even without even knowing that.
That sounds familiar.
So they were operating through the Catholic religious values. So despite they were actually against the church, I would say that I received a sort of religious education, even if my parents were not religious, officially, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Ireland is possibly a little similar in that it's an extremely Catholic culture. So even if you don't have a religious family in Ireland, it's very difficult to escape Catholicism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
because the values are very ingrained in this, in the fabric of society.
Sure.
So, for example, my parents decided to send me to the church for a couple of years.
Okay.
I was surprised, and I wanted to ask them why, and their justification was because by going to the church a few years, you will probably be more accepted in and by the society, this society.
Okay.
So yes, that was pretty much. They were functioning through a religious viewpoint, definitely.
Yeah. A lot of parents in Ireland have exactly the same choice, that 90% of our primary schools are controlled by the Catholic Church, and the Catholic ethos is very closely integrated throughout the entire school day. So you essentially have to decide whether to either ostracize your kids at the back of the class, or else allow them to be exposed to this kind of Catholic culture. So yeah, that sounds familiar, Diego.
Yeah. Well, there are some many similarities actually between Italy and probably Ireland. Italy is also, we have the Vatican there. The religious background is very much a part.
Yeah.
Probably now pretty strong. Also, the sense of moralism, not really morality, but moralism, is pretty strong in Italy, particularly south. Yeah.
So previously we had Jessica Schwab on the podcast. How did you guys meet, and have you had similar dealings with other cult leaders or members like you did with her?
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. Sorry.
Yeah, we had Jessica Schwab on the podcast before, and she described her background essentially in a spiritualist style cult, as I recall. But she talked about you, Diego, more than just a little bit, in terms of her story around how she found her way out of that. Is that something you do a lot?
Well, it's not my mission, but first of all, Jessica is my former partner. I haven't spoke with her. That has been 1 year now. But long story short, that time I was living in Bali, Indonesia.
Wow.
Bali is a mecca for New Age people. Aside from being locally Hindu. So what is going on there is Bali is a catalyst for all sorts of Western people have strange ideas, New Ages, spiritualism. And they go there also for business because there are many workshops going on, pretty expensive stuff. So I met her there. She was a YouTube, a digital spiritual preacher. And then I tried to ask her questions. It has been actually very painful, not really something simple. It took several months to make her reason about the kind of beliefs that she was carrying around. So it's been it's a painful process. It's not. It's definitely not easy, particularly when a person is your partner, because there are other things involved. And it's not something can be approached with a few epistemological questions, something like that. The person eventually will reason. It doesn't work this way at all, particularly when the magnitude of the belief that person carries is very strong.
Sure. Well, she speaks very highly of you, Diego, and she talked as well about some of your other work, and mentioned the term metacognition. Could you maybe explain for us what the term metacognition means, and If we're thinking about metacognition, does that mean we're engaged in metametacognition?
Well, I will say I work a lot with metacognition, but I prefer metametacognition, which is now there is a big bias about metacognition. For example, if you search online or if you Google the term, you can probably find maybe Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Even in the academic field, what I can see is that this bias is there, it's very strong. So probably many people believe that metacognition is about thinking about thinking.
Yeah.
Now, it is that, but that is too simplistic because it's not only about that. As a matter of fact, we all are metacognitive. Even a dog or a bird performs metacognition. So metacognition on the very basic description, very basic level, is about thinking, about decision making, what to do. In order to cook something or to drive a car, I have to be metacognitive. Otherwise, I won't be able to operate, or I will make a mess of everything. Now, it is true that metacognition is thinking about thinking, but I repeat, that is too simplistic. Because, for example, if I have a faith or if I have some spiritual beliefs, my thinking about my thinking is obviously going to be conditioned by my starting point of analysis, that is a religious framework of thinking, or maybe I'm not religious, but I'm conditioned by my upbringing, what I've been told, by my family, by my local culture, by the people I met and whatever. So we have to be very careful with when we analyze the very meaning of thinking, because what I care a lot about is distinguishing between the operation of thinking, the cognitive operation of thinking, and the cognitive operation of forming thought processes or ideas, because they're two different operations of the mind. Now, metametacognition, that sounds very funny, I know. Metametacognition is about trying to comprehend the very act having with our thinking before jumping into conclusions, for example. So what I propose is to analyze the validity or invalidity of the premises that are behind the conclusions we form or we propose. That is what I call metametacognition. Metacognition in itself is definitely not enough. And just like critical thinking, unfortunately, I'm afraid to say that critical thinking is wonderful. I think we should have critical thinking at school. But in reality, critical thinking doesn't quite work. We have a whole narrative, academic narrative of evidence, which proves that critical thinking doesn't work. And it should work. So I was wondering why critical thinking doesn't work and what can we do to make it work. I believe that critical thinking doesn't work because it's too methodological, and fundamentally, critical thinking is an unnatural way to think. So we are not. Our brain is not wired to think critically. Our brain is wired to be fallacious, to be fallible, and therefore performing critical thinking in the real life, applying that, is extremely counterintuitive. So there are many people, let me say this, there are many people that claim to be critical thinkers. I think there is no such thing as a critical thinker at all. Critical thinking does exist, but a critical thinker doesn't exist. So when people claim to be critical thinkers, it's like when people claim to be free thinkers. There is no such thing as free thinker.
So you mean we all have our own biases, and it's just too difficult to escape those biases?
I think that believing we can think without biases, completely without biases, 100% without biases is being delusional.
Sure.
Because it's just impossible. Our brain is wired to cling to biases. So I think what is important is to do the best we can to understand, to decode our biases, particularly before we stick to conclusions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think that critical thinking is definitely combined with other branches of cognitive science, which is what I'm doing. I'm trying to combine critical thinking with metacognition, metametacognition, and memetics, the understanding of memes.
Yeah.
And I call this multilogicality. Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about the EOF project, how you came about to create it as well?
Sure. But the idea came into being many years ago, probably 10 years ago. And at the beginning, it was just a personal viewpoint that came into being because I was wondering about how much biased people usually are in every sense when it comes to process information, particularly nowadays, or politically, or ideologically, or because of ideologies, and obviously because of religions, of course.
Yeah.
I think that a trigger has been caused by the fact that 10 years ago I was at the beginning of my English. I was learning English. And also I moved to Bali. So I had to deal with mainly people from the UK and people from the US and people from Australia, Western people there. And I think that I'm not quite sure if this because of the culture or because of the language or all things combined, but I detected that particularly people from the US have the tendency of being more gullible.
Okay.
The New Age movement is more ingrained in the US. It's more fertile there. And also religious thinking is, in a very strange way, I have to say, is more popular, is more accepted in North America, particularly. And the new kind of spirituality is pretty much all over the place, and is a big problem because it is also entering the field of psychotherapy, which is very bad.
Okay.
Very, very, very bad. Positivity, self-help, motivational stuff, and therapists proposing they are qualified professionals, but they propose this sort of things. I think is incredibly dangerous. Because it makes people even more delusional instead of reasoning carefully. Now, there is another problem. I'm working a lot with AI development.
Okay.
From a cognitive viewpoint, because there are things in our society that are changing greatly the fabric of our society, and not for the better. For example, the percentage of intelligence that is not human is increasing.
Sure.
And we are all collectively feeding artificial intelligence, in general, digital artificial intelligence, without even knowing that. For example, by making something viral or talking about characters like Kim Kardashian.
Uh-huh.
Even if we are just curious, we are actually going to feed the algorithm, and then things will go viral and will reach people that knew nothing about that stuff. And those people, when they don't have really a proper education, they particularly millennials, they will probably quite easily come to believe that they should stick to the same arguments, very shallow arguments, very shallow idea about a lifestyle in order to be a part of the society. This is what is going on greatly on platforms like Instagram, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about religious thinking, I work a lot with the comprehension of what religious thinking really is, because we can have religious thinking without necessarily having a conventional faith like
Sure.
Islam, Hindu faith, or Catholic or Christian. Is the proneness to believe without questioning in a proper way. To me, it is to be considered religious thinking. So, for example, I see people that religiously cling to Instagram celebrities, believing that that's the right way to be, and the right way to reach some kind of digital heaven of happiness and the identity they never had. So all this stuff, cerebrally speaking, cognitively speaking, is very dangerously similar to the religious thinking we know it conventionally speaking.
Yeah, yeah. And
Or,
just before we were going to talk today, Diego, I was looking at your videos, and there's a huge amount of material there, so definitely encourage people to check that out. But there was one thing that you said which is very similar to something I heard Professor Brian Cox say recently. So maybe Professor Brian Cox is watching all of your videos too, Diego. But you said, I'm not happy to consider myself an atheist. Atheism is often not just a classification of not believing, but often also a shelter that works like a meme, and people who engage without critical thinking. So that's that kind of term, atheism, seems to well, there seems to be more and more people who don't necessarily believe in a traditional God, but still don't like that term atheism. Could you maybe say a few words about that?
sure. I think atheism is definitely a very healthy starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's a bias to claim that we were born atheists, because we were not born atheists. We were born without the proneness to believe in something, and we were born with the proneness to believe technically. And by technically, by a technical belief, I mean I know my mother is there. I know there is food. There will be food for dinner. So
Yeah.
these are technical beliefs, but abstract beliefs and existential beliefs. We were not born with the proneness to believe in these things, despite some people claim we have the so-called God gene. That is also called the transporter number 2, but that is more a theory. We're not sure about it. If that is true, if it's true that there is some kind of innate proneness to believe in something transcendental, my personal theory is because probably natural selection developed that.
Okay.
Because we know we have to do that, something like that. But I want to go into that because this is my personal viewpoint.
Uh-huh.
Now, I think I don't like to classify myself in a specific way. I don't think that atheism is an ideology at all.
Okay.
who's a certain atheist. But then eventually, I know many people that claim to be atheists, but then they believe in sort of spiritual alike ideas, or some energy work, or some and not crazy things, but they claim they are atheists. Now, if we take a person like Sam Harris, for example, he's an atheist. He's a wonderful speaker. But Sam Harris fails to understand that by preaching about spirituality, he's trying to secularize spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it's probably just a term, but there is much more beyond the language. And so I don't know Sam Harris. I'm not inside his mind, but I think he has many biases about it.
Okay.
And many other speakers of reason cling to similar things.
Sure.
So at the same time, though, you served as a board member to Atheist Alliance International. Can you talk about the crossover between the EOF project and Atheist Alliance International?
Yeah, I wanted to try to see if it was possible to create an affiliation between EOF project and AI.
Uh-huh.
I think it was possible, but I think AI does a wonderful job, particularly in the non-Western world. I think the problem there was that the goals were slightly different, because the EOF project's goals are more about education. I don't want to say reforming education, but let's say implementing education.
Uh-huh.
And the goals of AI or organizations like Atheist Alliance International are more about raising awareness and secularism. So they are somehow compatible, but I rather prefer to focus more on the field of education and personal development, because I believe that is probably, personally, I believe is probably more important and is more a priority than secularism. Because a person can be secular, but eventually a person can also be ideological. And it's very difficult, for example, nowadays, particularly in the US, it's almost impossible to have a discussion about sensitive topics without
Mm-hmm.
or being Trump support. Like some I really don't like this stuff. It has nothing to do with education. It has to do with ideology.
Yeah.
And I think every ideology is idiotic by its very nature, cognitive nature, and creates nothing but separations. It's
Okay.
anti-educative, anti-educational.
Uh-huh. And I think organized atheism in general has a kind of something of a question mark against it recently. So some of the high-profile conferences, like the Reason Rally, didn't get the same big numbers that they had done when they started. But I think, Diego, you were involved in some significant reforms when you were at AAI. Can you tell us a little about the reforms that you implemented in the group and what you think that tells us about organized atheism in general?
Well, I think my viewpoint is probably a little bit biased, because when I joined AI, AI was was going through a kind of existential crisis because of some problems. I don't think it's the case to mention now. I don't want to make it public. Were internal problems related to people that were involved in the organization. So it was pretty confusing for several months, and there was a lot of lack of organizations, I have to say. I don't know where AI is at now. I I really hope they will improve themselves and they will succeed about whatever they want to do. But I'm talking about probably something like 2 years ago. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of mistrust, and something I didn't like, I have to say, was this kind of political correctness policy that was going on. I think is limiting, and I think is pretty irrelevant. The internal policy was about like having the equal amount of females and males, and not more than 3 people from the same country. I mean, we have to keep into account with the same brain, and our brain is conditioned. So I don't think those are when we want to promote some. Is important, and this sense of goodness that is actually on the rise is another form of religious thinking. I really don't like. I really don't like this. For example, the Canadian approach to gender equality and stuff. I totally support gender equality. I totally support females' rights, of course. But female rights are about human rights. Feminist rights is something else. It's about ideology. And the political correctness probably is nice on the paper, but in reality probably does more harm than good. Now there are many people that they get offended by merely terms. I don't think is a wise way to undertake. I think it will create even more and more divisions.
Sure.
Which is not, particularly digitally speaking, like social media are very powerful. I see people, they don't take this seriously. Nowadays we have something we never had throughout the history of mankind. We lived forever with a physical self and a psychological self, and now we have a digital self. Which also means we have also digital identity and a digital self-esteem. So we are not critical about it. I'm not putting down social media. I'm totally pro technology, but the relationship we are having with it is very bad, very bad. And that fuels fake news, misconception of reality, one-sided stories. Is pretty bad.
Yeah.
So also when I was in the, I saw a lot of tension between different viewpoints. I was not happy with that. Also, the decision making was not really much prone about investing in education. Educational. Yeah. It's my personal view.
Sure. I think I can understand some of the issues you're talking about in terms of, let's say, a trade-off between finding the right people versus having kind of strict rules that say the organization must be represented by people from diverse geographies. I guess if it's an international organization and it's dominated by people from 1 or 2 countries, maybe that's a problem, but there's kind of some tension between those rules where there's a requirement for diversity as compared to let's just pick whoever's keen to get involved. So I think you introduced some new rules, or the board did, while you were there. It's no longer the case, as I understand it, that you need to have, for example, so many people from different geographies. Is there a less relaxed way to approach that now?
Well, I don't know what AI is doing now. I think that is important to take into account the culture where people come from, of course. Because if we have an organization like this that all people are from the US, is definitely biased. I don't think it's super important. It's definitely important, but it should not be a priority. I mean, it's okay if the board members are, assuming, let's say 20, and it's okay if 10 are from North America and the other ones are from other countries. Okay, I mean, there must be some flexibility, I think. I think that nevertheless is definitely important also to talk during the meetings about the culture where people come from, because that can influence greatly the decision making inside the organization. Definitely, I think should not be a priority. Definitely. And also I think that probably filtering people maybe with a questionnaire would be also nice, productive.
Yeah. Well, I think I wasn't directly involved, but I know Atheist Ireland, where I do some work, used to be part of Atheist Alliance International. And whereas there was under the old rules, there was an AGM whereby all of the board directors were elected by members of the association. I think that was changed while you were on the board, Diego, so that directors would essentially appoint other directors and appoint their successors. Was that done with the kind of questionnaire that you just mentioned?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
But when I entered like the organization, as I say, that there was a critical point because there were some kind of problems going on, and there was a lot of mistrust, and everything was pretty nebulous. When I entered, like soon enough, other people left because they were not comfortable. But it's pretty much something unfortunately very common among organized entities like that, particularly when they are international.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I don't blame them at all. It's just very, very difficult. Like there are people different ages, different countries, different mentalities.
Sure.
They share the same goal, but sharing the same goal is not necessarily. It doesn't mean that there will be a solid agreement and a solid togetherness. You know, where we are people, we have different viewpoints, and some people are jealous, some people are envious, some people don't like that other people speak more than what they do, and so on. I think that organizations like that require a strong dose of critical thinking before they get formed. Particularly when it's about people that they never met each other, is very hard. It's very hard. So it's not like a company, like when there is like the goal is like the income and the success of the company. It's more like volunteering. Some people originally have some passion, but then they propose something, they see that they are not being considered, and therefore they drop. So there are many problems can emerge easily.
Sure.
Yeah.
And on a recent podcast, Seamus and I were contrasting the kind of organizations and the organizational issues that you just mentioned with how things tend to work in religions. So, for example, the Catholic Church has a pope, and there are a bunch of cardinals, and the same people at the top appoint their own successors. and it's quite different from a democratic association. Did the board at AAI have any concerns about the new rules, that they are undemocratic and they look a bit more like a religion?
No, I would not say that at all. No. No, but the problem that organizations like that try to be democratic, which is probably good, but democracy is very tricky because I mean, in a very simplistic way, the purpose that the majority decides for everybody else. What if the majority is conditioned? And it's not about where we come from. That is also it plays a role, of course, but it's not only about that. It's about the way we reason. So if the majority decides to perform a certain decision making or valuing something that should not really be a priority, that democratically speaking, that works. But in terms of productivity, maybe it's not really that good. Can create maybe more problems than benefits. So sure. I'm not against the democracy. I'm not against the democracy. But the problem with democracy is that people that perform the democratic, the exercise of democracy, the democratic rights, I think require proper thinking. And by proper thinking, I mean critical thinking skills, high order thinking, the best we can, of course. I think it's very important because otherwise we have decision making that is performed on emotional responses like the Brexit, for example, and modern populism is very concerning. It's very dangerous. We can see how populism is on the rise in France, in the US, polarization. So all of that is because of a lack of high order thinking skills particularly in the field of education, personal development. So, glorifying democracy when the real sociological situation and psychological situation is like that, I don't think is really wise, because it's another form of religious thinking, as I will describe.
Yeah.
There is a lot of religiosity when people talk, and particularly when people glorify democracy. I think we should be very, very, very careful.
Yeah. So when the old rules, if you look at, for example, lots and lots of countries around the world have a national atheist organization. There's American atheists, I guess Madeleine Murray O'Hair made very famous, and the Canadian atheists and the Irish atheists, and you go around all the countries, and all of those national organizations were traditionally members of Atheist Alliance International, and they would have voted democratically to elect the board of Atheist Alliance International. So those rules were changed so that there is no more democratic elected directors anymore. The directors just decide themselves who the next directors will be. You seem to think that the democratic approach had its limitations, Diego, and there were some problems with that, and maybe the new system's a bit better.
Well, I would say that the democratic approach definitely has plenty of limitations, and I'm not making stuff up. I think there is a whole, again, a whole narrative of evidence about it. And we can see that on the news every day if we are attentive. Now, I'm not putting down democracy. I definitely defend the democracy. I think democracy is important, but if we don't invest in education and human capital, then democracy is going to become a joke, and it's something that creates more problems than benefits. And we can see this very clearly nowadays. Like we take, popularly speaking, we take a democratic decision that are definitely not beneficial at all. Not beneficial at all for like Brexit, for example.
Yeah, but the other side of that, Diego, is so when you say that this is a democratic decision that is not very beneficial at all, there are lots of people in Britain who'll say, well, we think it's beneficial, so you vote in your own country, Diego, and the British can vote in their country, and if the British prefer to exit the European Union, then that doesn't mean they're stupid and you're smart. That just means they have different preferences from you.
Yeah, I understand that. But for example, if we run a referendum about abolishing the separation of the church from the state, and we run that referendum, I don't know, in North Carolina or in the whole U.S. system, there is probably be yes. Remains or gets intertwined with the state. How will we deal with that? Of course, I'm not going to say those people are stupid. They voted accordingly with their will, their what they think is right. But personally speaking, I think that will be yes, a democratic decision, definitely not a right one, because the outcomes will be pretty unpleasant in the long or short run. So this is just an example. What about they vote about introducing the guns in the school system democratically? So you see, democracy is very tricky. It's not that nice thing we usually think it is, and we usually describe it. I think democracy without a proper education is going to be very fallacious. Maybe not dangerous, but sort of, perhaps, sometimes.
Yeah, so I guess bringing it back to organized atheism in general, then, it sounds like you think a democratic approach to managing those organizations will have some problems with it, and maybe it's better just to appoint a board and they can look after the organizations without necessarily having to seek a democratic mandate.
No, I think that probably the democratic approach is probably the best one, actually. But I also think that it should not be glorified because it can easily become a form of ideology. And I think that what the priority should be, as I said earlier, should be about reasoning about the premises and the validity of the premises or the invalidity of the premises behind the ideas we form, and particularly the conclusions. For example, if we want as a net-based organizations, if we want to invest money to, I don't know, build some kind of campaign in some part of Africa, that sounds like good, but before going to vote democratically about it, I think we should reason very, very, very carefully about because maybe maybe we should invest the money in something else, or maybe not. But usually we don't do this. Usually, we come out with ideas, we reason a little bit, we have a meeting about ideas, and we tend to go for what feels right.
Yeah.
But what feels good, what feels right, is not necessarily what is true or what is the rational way to be.
Sure.
I mean, this is the basic of like critical analysis. The democracy very, very commonly doesn't really value much criticalness. Well, if I understand well what you are trying to ask me, I think that the problem in every organization is that what I will call monologicality.
Uh-huh.
And that's why I work a lot with plurilogicality or multilogicality. Now, we all tend to be monological. Now, whatever the mission, vision, and goals of the organization is, that is one element. It's not what the organization is all about, because the organization is also about people. People have different viewpoints, different feelings, different background that usually do not really go well together with the idea of democracy. Mm-hmm. And I think we should discuss about these things. And I think we should discuss about this stuff very, 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 very accurately, mm-hmm. Particularly when things are done digitally. Because people then, particularly in a group of people, there are people that have more sympathy for other people instead of other subjects, and then they create subgroups and they talk privately, and other people don't feel happy about that. So all of this is pretty much inevitable because we are human beings. But mm-hmm. Using AI or other atheist organizations as examples. Now, the purpose is what? Raising awareness about secularism and blah, 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 blah. I understand that is okay, but should not be one direction, should not be monodirectional, because there are people involved. And if we don't take that into account, if we don't have like a...
Well, yeah, when you say... When you say the purpose, Diego, is education and things like that, for sure, there's lots of projects like that people can get involved with, and they're very praiseworthy. I guess in my mind, the purpose of the organization was an umbrella group to represent the national atheist organizations. That's what it was set up as. But if the board makes a change so that board members are no longer elected by the affiliate groups, then it's no longer an organization that represents anyone. So if you have a, let's say the president, I know you weren't the president of the organization, Diego, I'm not too sure who the president is today, but if you have the president of an organization like that, who is elected to that role by all of the affiliate members, then if, someone called Bob is the president, then Bob is representative of all of those different international affiliate groups in that case. But if you make a change that says the president no longer needs to be elected by the affiliate members, then the president is just Bob. And Bob represents nobody except Bob. So, to my mind, once you make the changes that say you no longer have an elected board, then the board is essentially illegitimate and representative of nobody but themselves. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think I left before all these modifications. Now, what I think is that I think that an organization organizes itself the way the members prefer, but if the system is something like this, then we should drop the term of democracy, because this has nothing to do with democracy. It's more like internal decision making. The organization believes that is the proper way to be, but I'm not really. I don't really know about these modifications, because I left probably over 1 year ago, I guess, sort of. So I was not following the new the news about.
Okay, maybe the changes were made in a way that excluded you too, Diego. That's rather unfortunate.
Sorry?
Sorry, I'm just making a joke. But listen, the clock is wearing on. I'm conscious that we can't suck up your entire day. But before we let you go, would it be possible for you to let people know where the best place is to stay in touch with you and your work? Are you on Twitter, or should people visit the EOF project website?
Yeah, I'm on social media, Facebook. I'm not very much on Twitter. I just joined very recently.
Okay.
I think the best option is to check the website is eofproject.net. Long ago was .org, now is .net, and we can easily find it like with a Google search, and it's probably the best platform where to interact. And yes, eventually Facebook. Facebook, is more personal.
Sure. Well, there's lots of great material on that website, and for sure we encourage people to check that out. And listen, that was an interesting chat today, Diego. It probably went in a direction that we didn't necessarily expect, but that was good fun. So thank you for your time. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Great. All the best.
Take it easy.
Bye, Diego.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So, apologies for that, Seamus. Yet again, I have chased off down some rabbit hole. We probably should have been talking more about metacognition and metametacognition, but we ended up talking instead about democracy, yes or no. As I understand it, Diego isn't convinced, but there you go.
Yeah, apologies again to everybody for my voice, and thanks for you for doing yeoman's work yet again, carrying me through another podcast.
You need some more single malt.
I'm telling you, I need something, man. I don't know. This is bad. So, again, apologies everybody for my voice. I'll make this super short and sweet. Thanks again for Diego coming on. Be sure to check out all of his links and everything. You already know how to keep up with us except for Twitter. You'll find John Hamill at JohnHamill151, myself at the FD Prophet. Remember, next time, freedom of thought can be given away, not taken away. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Hey, folks, if you want to keep up with what's going on with the freethoughtprophet.com, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Click the subscribe button and also the little bell so you can get your notifications of upcoming episodes. You can also see all of our archived episodes there as well. Also on Podbeam. You can listen to us audio only, of course. You could also check out all the previous episodes and blogs there as well. And you could hear us via iTunes as well. The freethoughtprophet.com has all these as well as previous blogs and other materials for your viewing pleasure. So please keep up with us in the future, and thanks again for all your support.